All right, everyone. Hello. We are here to talk a little bit more about banking. Last lecture, we talked about money, what money is, what our understanding of money is, and how to classify different types of money and what money does, its functions. Now we're going to talk a little bit about banking. And the reason why it's important to talk about banking is because I find that a lot of students don't really understand what a bank does or what the role of banks are. The way that your text presents this is it talks about the Federal Reserve and Federal Reserve banking first, and then it goes down to the level of discussing the local bank at that level, and it more talks about the effects that the Fed has on local banks. But I find that students often don't have an understanding really of what a bank is and what a bank does. And so I always start at the banking level first, and then we'll move on to the Fed. And I've always found that it creates a much better foundation for understanding the Fed. So we're going to talk about banking today. I think that most of you will be surprised actually by how banking is done and how banking is mostly accounted for. So let's just start with a discussion of banks. And this bank in the picture has particular memories for me because when I was growing up, this bank, which is now the First National Bank of Long Island, had another name. It was called Chemical Bank, which is still a bank that I believe has branches up north. And this used to be a branch of Chemical Bank. And this very bank in the picture is the bank that my parents banked at. And in Stony Brook, Long Island, Setauket, Long Island, which is where I grew up. And when I was a little girl, this is the bank that I would go to. And so if I was with my mom during the week, she would usually drive through the drive-through here with her car and do her banking through the window because she had us 3 kids and probably didn't want to get out of the car and go inside the bank. But on Saturdays, my father would take the kids away for the day, take my 2 brothers to get their hair cut, which they got cut almost every single Saturday at an old-fashioned barber shop. And when my brothers would get their hair cut at the barber shop, I would go shopping in this little Stony Brook. It was an area called the Stony Brook Green with lots of shops, and I would get to go to stores by myself while my brothers and my dad were getting their hair cut. And then either on the way there or on the way back, we would stop at the Chemical Bank. And my father would pull up in this parking lot, and we would come in this door right here. And I remember my father would always be doing his banking, but he would always give us either some cash or maybe sometimes a check from the main account. And he would have us go up to the counter where the lady worked, and we would push this money or a check or whatever it was across the threshold, the counter of the bank teller, and he would tell us to say, I need to put this in my college account. And he would have us understand that we were saving money, that we were putting money aside to go to college, and that every week he would put some money aside for us in our college account. And he taught us when we were little that this is how you save and this is how you put aside money. And so I have a lot of memories of this bank, getting lollipops and going with my dad and my mom and my brothers to get done what we needed to get done. But when I was a child, I didn't totally understand really any more than the bank as a safe place to keep money. In other words, as a child, I understood that the bank was a place where you could keep money, and maybe I understood that there was a vault inside for the cash, or that they kept it away from you so that it didn't get spent. But I didn't really understand at all what was really happening in the bank. And I don't think many people do. In fact, I heard recently someone say something to the extent of, well, if you give people, right, if people in America that are very rich, if they have money, or if they somehow are allowed to earn money or allowed to keep money that they earn, what happens if they just put it all in the bank? Isn't that bad, and doesn't that not benefit anybody? I don't know what happened there. That doesn't really benefit anybody if there's just money in the bank, because That money in the bank is just theirs and it's piling up, and it's not being used. And so that's interesting that someone would think that we might draw that conclusion about banking. And it helps me understand that we probably don't really have a totally good idea of what banks do. We have a vague idea of what banks do. You might have visited the bank to open a checking account. You might have visited a bank because you have a savings account. You might think a bank is a safe place to store your money so that it doesn't get stolen from you. You might think a bank is there to give you a little bit of interest, even though if you have a checking account, that is indeed a very, very little bit of interest. And if you have a savings account, it's also a very little bit of interest. You might think that a bank is there to make change for you, or to be able to, if you've dealt on things like with student council before, or you've done a garage sale where you end up with lots of change and you can bring it to the bank and they will change your change into dollars. Maybe we think the bank is some kind of service for money. Maybe you've been to the bank and had them exchange money for foreign currency when you went overseas, or you think the bank is a place to give you a debit card. And banks do these things, but it's not the primary function of what a bank does. Think about this. If a bank is just there to change your change rolls into dollars for you, or if they're just there to hold your money for you while you don't choose to spend it, and then when you're ready to spend it, they have to give it to you, that wouldn't be a very profitable business to be in. There's not really a way to make money off of those ventures. So let's think about what a bank really does and try to get into that a little bit. Let's really think about what a bank actually is doing. Why do people go into the banking, and what is it that's happening when you bring your money to the bank? So I've asked someone to come and help us out today with a simple illustration of banking. And so you can come on, Ellie. All right. Usually we'd be setting this up in the classroom in a classroom illustration, but since we're not in class, we're going to have to make do. Here's Ellie. All right. And so what we're going to do is say that I am a brand new banker, and I want you to imagine that in my brand new bank, I have rented a building, and maybe I have a chair that I'm sitting in as the banker here. Maybe I've been able to set up a TV tray or something like that, and I have a place to keep money. Let's say that I'm banking in a growing, developing country for right now. And so here's my vault that I have, a bucket, and I have no deposits as of right now. I'm really hoping that someone's going to come to the bank and ask me to take care of some money for them. Really hoping that that happens soon. And so, oh, hello, there's a customer. Okay, how are you today?
Good, and you?
Welcome to the Chemical Bank. How's it going?
Quite all right.
All right, good. All right, well, can I help you today in any way?
I would like to deposit $500.
Oh, you want to deposit $500 in here? Well, we certainly can take deposits. I would really appreciate that. You would just want a place for safekeeping for your money. Okay, and so I'll just take your name. Name, please?
Eleanor.
Eleanor. Okay, last name? Jeffis. Okay, great. Eleanor Jeffis, and just take your address, please.
919 West Massachusetts.
All right, very good. And you want to deposit $500. I'm going to put that on my ledger right here. And if you'll just give me the $500, thank you. $500. Here we go. That can go into the bank. And I'm going to put it straight into my vault. And I appreciate it. And, do you think you'll be wanting this money anytime soon, or not really sure yet?
Not sure.
Okay. Well, no problem. We've got it safe in our vault for you here, and we'll see you soon. All right. And so there was a transaction that I had with Eleanor Jeffis. But let's just say that on the very next day, Eleanor's evil twin comes to the bank, and we're going to say her name is Judy Jeffis. Hello, Judy.
Oh, Judy.
How can I help you today, Judy?
I want to take out a loan.
You want to take out a loan. And how much would you like to take out in loan?
$600.
$600. Well, let me check on that for just a minute. Well, here's the problem. I only have $500 to lend out, and I don't have $600. I only have $500. So I simply can't make the loan. I don't have the capital to do it. And so I'm going to deny Judy, bye-bye Judy, the $600 loan because I don't have the money to do it. Now, that is a very, very simplistic example of what's called 100% reserve banking. In other words, why did I not loan her the money? Well, first of all, because the loan that she asked for exceeded my total amount of the bank. But even if Judy had asked for $500, I could not have made that loan to her. And the reason why is because let's say that Eleanor comes back the very next day and she asks to take out $100 of her deposit or $200 or God forbid $500, and I've lent that money out. Well, if I lend that money out, I'm right back to here, my zero-sum game in the bank. And so if I'm in 100% reserve banking, that means that I have to reserve 100% of my deposits. In other words, I have to reserve 100% of the $500 in deposits or any other deposits that people come and make to my bank. I have to hold on to these for safekeeping in case the people come and they would like to get their stuff back out. And so I'm going to reserve 100% of their deposits in order to keep things safe, in order to keep the bank running. Now, that might seem to make a lot of sense to you. And it does if you're in a system of 100% reserve banking. However, in the United States, we do not function on a system of 100% reserve banking. We have a very different system that is called the fractional reserve banking system. And fractional reserve banking is what allows our money supply in the United States to grow. So I'm going to tell you exactly how this works. You're going to be patient. You're going to listen. Don't get frustrated because this is the part where I told you might be surprised about how things really work. So let me just pause for a minute. Okay, so we're going to try looking at a reserve banking, like I said, that is not 100% reserve banking or full reserve banking, but is fractional reserve banking. And this is the kind of banking that we have in the United States. And so let's have Eleanor Jeffers come in again. And Eleanor, let's pretend that you're making that same $500 deposit that you made with me first. And so when I look at this $500, in a 100% reserve system, I have to reserve 100% of the deposit. But in the real world, in the United States, in the fractional reserve system, that's actually not what I do. And so I tell Eleanor, yes, I'm going to keep this money for safekeeping, and you can come and get this money anytime you want. Does anyone listening know what kind of account? If I tell Eleanor here that she can get the money out at any time she wants, here, let's get you in the picture, Ellie. All right, if she can get out the thing at any time she wants, what kind of account did she open? Go back to the lesson on money and banking. And if you said a demand deposit account, then you're right. She has a demand deposit account. She can come in and ask for this money. It's not a timed deposit. And so, Eleanor, our commitment to you as the bank, are you in the picture?
No.
There you go.
No.
All right, our commitment to you as the chemical bank is that whenever you need to come and get this $500, it'll be there for you, okay? Because you trust the bank, don't you?
Right.
All right, wonderful. So thank you very much, and have a great day. We'll hold on to this asset, okay? Step aside. Well, here's what really happens. What really happens is that the bank does a reserve of this money because here's the thing. We just told Eleanor she could come back. Now, she just deposited this money in the bank today. Is there really a strong chance that she's going to come back tomorrow and want that money out? That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense if that's true, but we have to be ready for that. And so in my column as a banker, I'm going to have assets, and I'm also going to have what we call liabilities. Liabilities are the things that I might owe. And so my liabilities as a banker, first of all, are right now today $500. And the reason it's $500 is because Eleanor has given me $500, and at any moment I have told her that because she's open demand deposit, she can come back and get this money. And so what that means is that at any moment she could walk in and I have to give her this $500 and to demand deposit. So it is considered a liability for me. But here's the interesting thing. All right, come on in, Judy. And why don't you try to get a loan today of $400?
Need a loan.
Hi, Judy.
$400.
$400 loan you'd like to make?
Yes.
Well, let's see whether or not I have that money. Now, let's pause here for just a moment. If Judy asks me for a loan of $400, should I give it to her? Let's talk very quickly about banking. All right, Judy, come on in here. All right, Judy, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. Do you have a permanent address, Judy?
Yes.
Great. And how long have you lived at your current address?
15 years.
15 years. Okay. And do you have a job, Judy?
No.
You don't? No.
Yes.
You don't? You do have a job?
I don't have a job.
All right. No accents, Judy. We don't want to hear you from Russia. Okay. So you have a job.
Yes.
Okay. And what do you do for a living, Judy?
I give shots to horses.
Give shots to horses. How long have you been doing that?
10 long years.
10 years. So 10 years. Have you worked for the same employer for those 10 years? Horse Shots, Inc.?
No.
Oh.
I killed the horse, so I got fired.
Okay. So recently you were fired?
Yes.
Okay. But you've had a job for 10 years. Have you ever paid bills before, Judy?
Yes.
Okay. Who have you paid bills to? Do you own a car? Have you ever paid a car payment? Yes. Okay. Can you show me
natural gas?
Can you show me your Tico? Excellent. You pay. Let me see your energy. Oh no, I want your money. Give me your bills, your energy bill and your car loan bill. Let me just take a quick look at this. Very good. Okay. Step to the side, Judy. I just want to talk to our audience here. So what I've found out from looking at Judy is that, yes, she's had a couple of rough points along the way. Got fired recently, but here's the thing. She has a job. She's lived at the same address for 15 years. I know where she lives. She is going to get another job soon, probably, even if it's not in the horse industry. She has a very good record of paying her payments. She has not defaulted on any loans. She's been paying her car payment. She's been paying her house payment, paying her to-go electricity bill. She seems to be a fairly good risk. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give her the loan that she's asking for. Now she wants $400. Now here is the real interesting question. Remember that girl, Eleanor Jeffers, that had came in and given me $500. I have the money to give her, right? I clearly have that in my column. And so we have to consider the $500 that Eleanor Jeffers had given me earlier as an asset. The problem is it's both an asset and a liability. In other words, yeah, I can loan this money out. It's an asset to me, but because I also owe it potentially to Eleanor in a demand deposit sense, I could be in a little bit of trouble. But we have something called fractional reserve banking. And so as a banker, what you may not know is that when Eleanor came and she gave me that $500 deposit, what I did was in my assets column, I actually considered my assets to be not $500, but $450. Why? Well, because I am operating on what we call the fractional reserve system. And I hope you guys are taking good notes, okay? Over here, I'm going to put my reserves, and I'm going to tell you that I'm operating on a 10% reserve requirement. And since 10% of $500 is $50, the law is going to require me to reserve a certain percentage of all deposits in my reserve requirement, as a reserve requirement in my bank reserves. So over here, I'm going to put $50, and I will consider myself to have an asset of $450 of what's called loanable cash. Okay, this is loanable funds. And I'll have $50 that I cannot loan. Cannot loan this $50 out. Why? Because that helps me meet my liabilities. It helps me meet my demand deposits. Now, you might already be thinking, well, that doesn't make any sense because you told her she can come back and get the $500 anytime she wants, and you only have $50 if you're going to loan this out. Well, Eleanor just asked me for $400, and here's the thing. She seems like, not Eleanor, Judy, right? She seems like a pretty good risk, and I want to loan it to her because she's going to pay me back, and she's going to pay me back with interest. One moment. All right, so I've gotten our friend Judy back, and Judy has asked for a loan of $400. And so I've considered her record of payment, and I've considered her as a person. I've reviewed her loan application, and I've actually decided to go ahead and loan her the $400, okay? Judy, I want to just talk with you for a minute. You're going to make payments on this, right? What are you using the $400 for, by the way?
New horse needles.
All right. So she's going to start her own business, perhaps. So she's got to buy these horse needles, and that sounds like a good thing. So I'm going to give you this $400. You're going to make payments on this of, let's say, $30 a month. $25 a month of that is going to go back to pay the $400. And then you're going to pay me you're going to be paying me interest. Right. Okay, so $5 of that is just fees for the loan I'm giving you. The bank, it wants to make interest back on your loan. Okay? So in the end, you're going to pay me back a little bit more than the $400 you borrowed. But you're going to get to borrow it and go out and make your needles and make your way in the world and start your business. What do you think about that? Oh, it's great? Okay. Well, I appreciate doing business with you, Judy, and I'm going to give you this $400. All right? Now, Judy, I have a question for you. Do you want to take that $400 in cash with you today? Are you planning on walking out of the bank with $400, or do you want to have a debit card that you can take, or a checkbook that you can take to the shop store and spend it that way?
I'll take it the second way.
You want to like have a debit card. You don't want to just walking around with $400 can be a little bit scary, right? I mean,
pickpockets.
Yeah, pickpockets and just what's in your.
We're in New York.
Here's the thing. What I can do is I can open an account for you in the bank today and just stick this $400 in the account, and you can go and spend the $400 today. No problem. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take this $400 and we're going to put it into an account in the bank. So let me go ahead and do that. Now, we just lent out the $400, of course, but I'm going to put that money right back in. Now, since I lent Eleanor $400, I'm going to put that over in my liabilities column because I've lent her the $400, but I also consider her $400 an asset to me. Now, how can that be? Well, hang on a second. Remember my rules? Remember how I have to take a reserve requirement out of this? I can't just stick this into my loanable funds cash. You might be thinking, this does not make any sense. Just hang on, okay? I've got to treat this as both a liability and an asset because I'm liable for the money in the sense that she can go take her debit card to the shop store right now and spend all $400. But I also know that I'm going to get this money back from Judy Jeffis with interest. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to consider this to be loanable funds, okay? I've got my $450 that I reserved. Now I'm going to add to my $450. Can't add $400 because I've got to take a 10% reserve requirement, which brings my reserves, by the way, up to $90. I now have $90 in reserves. But I'm going to add in $360 into my assets column. And now that I have $360, I'm going to add that to my $450. And I'm going to say I have $810. I'm just going to draw a straight line down here so you can see this. I now have $810 in my assets column. I have $900 total in my liabilities column. But with just the simple deposit that I got this morning from that Eleanor Jeffers of $500, I have now seen a monetary expansion to $810. Now, you might be getting awfully concerned about my bank and its ability to pay, but let's up the ante just a moment. Let's say someone comes into the bank right now and they ask me for $800. Looking at my asset and liability sheet, or you can call this a T sheet, you can see, right? Looking at my balance sheet, should I lend the $800? Well, here's the thing. If they're going to pay it back, the answer is yes. The way banks make money isn't by turning change or by ferries that fly around the bank. And no, the way that banks make money is by loaning money. And I want to loan out that $800. And so if I feel that I have a good risk to loan that money to, I will. I'll loan out the $80. Again, the $800. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, now, when I loan this money out, I will add $800 to my assets, but I'll remember, wait a minute, it can't really be that. It really is going to be $720. Why? Because I have to take $80, 10% of my deposit, of my loan, and I have to put that into reserves. So now I have $170 of reserve cash, and I add $720 and $810. Now I have $1,530 in the assets column. By the way, I do have to add my $800 over here because it is a liability. Again, I've made another loan that can be drawn on the bank. Now I haven't even added in my interest. I'm not even doing this balance sheet with interest. In real life, I would be charging Eleanor money on the loan and I would be adding it into these calculations over here on your balance sheet that you see. But right now, I'm just interested in us looking at these numbers. And what you're seeing is that my loanable funds, or you call that LF, my loanable funds amount, has been growing. My reserve requirement over here has also been growing. It's grown all the way to 170. And my liabilities are also growing. But what you have to understand is that when I start getting interest back into the bank, I'm going to start adding that into my assets, and I'm going to keep building on this cash. Now, in this simple example, no interest has even been accrued. No interest has even been written down. But you can see that my loanable funds are growing. I have more and more power to loan money to people. Now, you might be very frustrated and say, well, none of this makes sense to me because the $1,530 is all fake. It's all in loans. And you might be looking at this and saying, this is a house of cards. If any one person comes into the bank and they start demanding all that demand deposit money or they spend it all, then the bank's going to be in trouble. Well, here's what's going to happen, okay? The chances are very slim that everybody is going to come to the bank on one day and call all their money due. That's why they have it in the bank to begin with. And if the bank gets into a tight spot, it has reserves that it can use to meet demand. And it also has some people that it can call. And we'll get into that when we get into our lessons on the Federal Reserve and on bank supervision. But the most important thing that's happening here is that the bank is being profitable and it's loaning out money that is paid back in interest, but also that people are going out and they're using money for purposes that grow the economy. Now, hang on for a second. The first person came in and they put their $500, Eleanor, right? She put her $500 into the pot. And then the next thing you know, I had a lot more money going into my pot, and I have $170 here in reserve funds that I'm not allowed to spend, that I'm keeping over here in my little, but otherwise the money that's in the bank itself is growing. The money that's out in circulation is also growing, and that money is coming into the bank and flowing out of the bank. But let's just think about, let's say that when Eleanor goes out and buys her new shots for the horse, she sets up a profitable business. Does that business have any value? We just talked about the difference between value and money. And we also talked about the difference between money and wealth. Do you believe that everything that the United States has, in a sense of its total wealth, is in M1 or even M2? Or is our wealth represented by our cars, our dwellings, our businesses, our pieces of artwork, our assets that we have, that we use? Is wealth, is the wealth of a company, does that count its machines that are used to make things? Does the wealth of a corporation include the building which houses the corporation, or does it just include the money that's in its actual cash register? No, wealth is more than just actual money. And so we believe that when Eleanor goes out to buy a business, or the person coming in and asking for a loan of $800 goes out and they hire a person to come and install a new sprinkler system, that's adding to wealth. And that new sprinkler systems or new shots or new houses or new structures are adding to the total wealth of a country. And so what you're seeing at the bank is called the fractional reserve system. And what you're watching when you watch money, okay, grow from, let's see if we can get a color that'll work here. When you watch money grow from $500 to $700, I think it was $710, and then again to $1,530, what you're watching is what's called monetary expansion. And this is the way that our banking system works. Is it a house of cards? Well, that's a good question. There are people that are against the fractional reserve banking system, but the fractional reserve banking system has existed for a very long time. And it's predicated on the idea that wealth is more than actual dollars. Wealth can also be measured by investments and things people own and businesses. And so the idea is that if you run this bank in a system that's reliable and keeps it accountable, then they will have the money to meet demand. They will have the money to meet when someone comes in and asks for money. And so if Eleanor were to come back and she were to ask me for her initial $500 deposit, or her deposit of $300, $300 of her $500, I could easily reach into the bank with the money that's flowing back into it, and I could give her her $300. I have $1,530 to loan. Real quickly, remember when I gave Eleanor the $400 and I said, do you want to open an account here? And she said yes, and so I opened it up and I added it to my bank balance sheet right here, right? That's when we did this. She said, I don't want to take the $400 with me because of pickpockets. That does not have to happen at the same bank you get the loan. Eleanor could easily take the $400 from my bank, and she could go put it into another bank and keep it for safekeeping there. It doesn't matter. The total loadable funds in the United States are still growing. It matters to my bank, but the same thing is going to happen at her bank. They'll take the $400, put a 10% reserve requirement, and they'll put it onto their asset sheet. So every bank in the United States has an asset sheet that is based on the fractional reserve system. And that means that the money that you think is in the bank isn't really there. Does that make sense? The bank does not have all the money that's ever been loaned to it in the vault cash, and they don't have it underground, and they don't have it in some kind of supervisory bank. That money is being loaned out. This goes back to that question, well, what happens if a rich person just keeps all their money in the bank and it doesn't benefit anyone? No, it benefits anyone who comes to the bank asking for a loan, right? It benefits those who come to the bank asking for loans, and those who come to the bank asking for loans are evaluated as to whether or not they are a good risk for paying that money back. If you look like the kind of person through your banking records, through your financial dealings, and through your status as a person who may have just moved here or may not have a job or may not have the way to pay anything back, then you're probably a high risk to the bank, and they're either not going to loan you the money, or they're going to loan you the money at a very high interest rate, or they're going to make someone else co-sign on the loan, so that if they can't get the money from you, they'll get it from another person. Does that make sense? But this is called the fractional reserve system. In closing, the United States does not have a 100% reserve system. It has a fractional reserve system. What the fractional reserve system does, it allows for monetary expansion. In other words, it allows the loanable funds in the country to grow, and therefore it allows business, industry, and entrepreneurship to flourish without having a zero-sum game where everything always has to be held so tightly. This tells you that you have to have some good confidence in the banking system. So let's go back and ask ourselves, what about that chemical bank? Should I trust that bank incredibly implicitly? Should I believe that that bank is just being 100% honest and they're making great decisions? And is there anybody who checks to see if this reserve requirement is really being held on to? Does anyone ever ask if the reserve requirement's really being held, or do they really keep that money? And who inspects the bank balance sheet? Who makes sure that the bank is being responsible and that their assets aren't way outweighing, that their liabilities aren't way outweighing the assets? And who's going to make sure, and who do you turn to if you go to your bank and they say, sorry, we don't have the money, we lent it out to someone else? They're not going to say that, because that's going to cause a crisis in banking confidence. But is there any kind of oversight to banks? Is there any kind of regulator of banks? Well, this is the next question that we're getting to. The Federal Reserve acts in several ways with banks. When you talk about whether it's hard to get a loan or easy to get a loan, when you talk about things like the money supply, when you talk about things like a loose money supply or a tight money supply, when you talk about those ideas, you're really talking about the actions of the Federal Reserve. And now that you understand exactly how a bank works, and you understand that it's not like you thought when you were little, 100% reserve game where the bank is just holding on to assets for you to come back and get, but instead that they're using those assets to make money themselves, to grow both their own business and to grow opportunities for the people who bank at the bank or who borrow money from the bank, you'll be much better capable of understanding what's happening with the Federal Reserve. So what I'm going to ask you to do as we close out the week is I want you to watch the little introductory cartoon video that's called In Plain English. This is a little 13-minute video. It's produced by the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank, and it explains just a little bit of what the Fed does. And I'll do another quick video to talk about the structure of the Fed. But next week, we will talk about what the Fed does every day, and we're going to link it to how it affects this bank right here. Whether you're talking about Chemical Bank, whether you're talking about SunTrust Bank, whether you're talking about Bank of America, or you're talking about the Suncoast Federal Credit Union. These banks don't all belong to the Federal Reserve, but they're all affected by what the Federal Reserve does. And they all live in the same banking system, and they all live in the same country and in the same world, where our banking is affected by the decisions. The Fed's been making an awful lot of decisions over the last weeks of crisis. And so it's important that you understand this from the beginning. If you have questions on how fractional reserve banking works, please give me a call or write me an email, because it's very important that you get this down before we move on to the next thing. So watch the In Plain English video, watch one more short video from me from the week, and then that's going to be a wrap. And don't forget to write your current event. I've given you directions for that. All right, guys, hopefully you understand fractional reserve banking. Have a good night.